You wake at 3 in the morning, not from a nightmare but from the weight of your own thoughts. And there it is again, that desire you have never spoken aloud, the one that lives in the margins of your consciousness like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. You have tried everything. You have meditated, you have analyzed, you have promised yourself that this time will be the last time you entertain such thoughts. You have read the books, done the inner work, cultivated awareness. You consider yourself conscious, awake, someone who understands the patterns of mind and the tricks of ego. Yet here you are, fighting the same silent battle you have fought for months or years, exhausted by the endless resistance against something within yourself that will not be quieted. The worst part is not the desire itself, but the isolation it creates. You cannot tell anyone. How do you explain to others that despite all your spiritual practice, despite your understanding of what is healthy or right, or aligned with your values, there exists within you this persistent wanting of something you have deemed forbidden? You feel like a fraud, like your consciousness is a thin veneer covering something darker and more honest. Every morning you wake with resolve, and every night you lie in bed wondering why awareness has not freed you, why understanding has not dissolved this persistent pull toward what you believe you should not want. What if I told you that the very structure of your struggle contains a fundamental misunderstanding about the relationship between consciousness and desire? Not the misunderstanding that you need to try harder or be more aware, but something deeper, something that strikes at the heart of how we conceive of ourselves as conscious beings in the first place. The conscious person who fights against forbidden desires is engaged in a particular kind of suffering, one that is unique to those who have developed self-awareness. This is not the suffering of ignorance, but the suffering of a consciousness that has turned against itself. And the silence, that terrible isolation you feel, is not accidental, but essential to maintaining the structure of the conflict. To speak the desire aloud would be to give it reality in a way that threatens the entire edifice of who you believe you should be. Let us begin by examining what we mean when we speak of forbidden desires. The word forbidden carries weight, suggests transgression, implies an authority that declares certain wants illegitimate. But here is the first question we must sit with. Who exactly has forbidden these desires? You might answer that society has, or your moral framework has, or your understanding of what is healthy or wise has. But trace this back further. The prohibition exists within your own consciousness. You are both the authority who forbids and the subject who wants. You are the judge and the accused, the prison guard and the prisoner. This internal division is what creates the silent warfare, and consciousness becomes the weapon you wield against yourself. The more aware you become, the more sophisticated your self-surveillance, the more refined your ability to detect and suppress these unwanted desires. Consciousness, which you believed would liberate you, has become the instrument of your own oppression. But why do conscious people struggle with this more intensely than those who are less self-aware? The answer lies in the nature of consciousness itself. When you become aware of your thoughts and patterns, when you learn to observe your mind, you also develop a capacity for judgment about what you observe. You create categories of acceptable and unacceptable, aligned and misaligned, conscious and unconscious. The person who has never developed this observational capacity simply experiences desire, without the additional layer of moral evaluation. They want something, and they either pursue it or they do not. But there is no internal committee meeting to determine whether the want itself is legitimate. You, on the other hand, have built an elaborate system of evaluation. Every desire must pass through a filter of consciousness, must be examined for its origins, its implications, its alignment with your values and your vision of who you are becoming. And certain desires, the ones you deem forbidden, fail this test repeatedly, yet they do not disappear. They persist with a kind of stubborn integrity, returning again and again no matter how many times consciousness rejects them. Consider what happens in this dynamic. The desire arises. Immediately before you have even fully felt it, consciousness intervenes. No, this is not acceptable. This is not who I am. This is not what a conscious person wants. This is a remnant of old patterns, of conditioning, of ego. I must not entertain this. And so you push it down, redirect your attention, replace it with more acceptable thoughts. But the desire does not actually go anywhere. It simply moves beneath the surface, where it continues to exert a kind of gravitational pull on your attention. You find yourself thinking about it despite your resolve not to. It appears in your dreams, in your fantasies, in those moments when your vigilance relaxes. And each time it appears, you strengthen your resolve to fight it, which means you strengthen your identification with the consciousness that fights. You become not a person who sometimes experiences a particular desire, but a person who is defined by their struggle against that desire. The silent war becomes your identity. This is where the isolation becomes unbearable. You cannot speak about this struggle, because to speak it would require you to admit several things simultaneously. First, that you are not as conscious as you believed, because surely truly conscious people would not have such desires. Second, that you are engaged in an internal battle that shows no sign of resolution, which feels like failure. Third, that there is a part of you that, despite all your understanding and practice, wants something you have decided you should not want. To admit these things would be to crack the image you have carefully constructed of yourself as someone who is awakening, evolving, becoming more aware. And so you keep silent. You perform consciousness for others while privately fighting this exhausting battle that no one else can see. If this resonates with something you have been experiencing, something you have perhaps never named quite this directly before, consider subscribing to this channel. I explore these territories of consciousness and human experience every week, and I would be honored to have you along for this journey of understanding what it truly means to be awake. Now let us go deeper into the mechanism of this silent warfare, because understanding how it operates is the first step towards seeing through it. The conscious person who fights forbidden desires believes they are engaged in a noble struggle, a battle of higher self against lower impulses, consciousness against unconsciousness, wisdom against weakness. But examine this more closely. What exactly are you fighting? You are fighting a wanting, a movement of energy within your own system that points towards something. The desire itself is not an action, but an arising, a signal, a piece of information about what lives within you. By declaring it forbidden, by engaging in constant warfare against it, you have transformed information into enemy. And here is the crucial insight. You cannot win a war against yourself. Every battle you fight against a forbidden desire is a battle in which both sides are you. When consciousness suppresses the desire, you feel momentarily victorious, but the suppression itself requires constant energy and vigilance. When the desire breaks through despite your efforts, you feel defeated, but the defeat only strengthens your resolve to fight harder next time. Both outcomes perpetuate the struggle. Both outcomes keep you locked in the same pattern. The silence amplifies everything. In the privacy of your own mind, the desire can take on monstrous proportions. Without the reality check that comes from speaking something aloud, from hearing it reflected back through another person's understanding, the forbidden desire becomes larger than life. It becomes not just a wanting, but evidence of your fundamental brokenness, your spiritual failure, your secret darkness. You imagine that if anyone knew what you wanted, they would see through your facade of consciousness to the mess you really are beneath. And so you hold it closer, hide it deeper, fight it harder. The silence protects your image, but intensifies your suffering. I know many of you watching this have carried something like this alone for a long time. You have never told anyone what you are really struggling with, what desires arise in you that you believe you should not have. You have been fighting this silent battle, thinking you are the only one, believing that your consciousness should have freed you from this by now. But here is what I want you to understand. The moment you name this struggle, even just in a comment below, something fundamental shifts. You stop being completely alone with it. So let me ask you directly, how long have you been fighting against a desire you have never spoken aloud? What is it costing you to maintain this silence? I want you to share in the comments, not because I need engagement, but because someone else watching this needs to see your words. They need to know they are not the only conscious person struggling with wanting something they believe they should not want. And if you cannot find the words right now, if it feels too vulnerable to name specifically, just type this: I have been fighting in silence too. That is all. Just those 6 words. Because when you do, You create permission for dozens of others to acknowledge their own silent battles. Your willingness to be honest about this struggle, even anonymously, helps break the isolation that makes this so unbearable. So comment below. Tell me where you are in this. I read every single one, and I promise you, you are not alone in this fight. Let us now examine the concept of the forbidden more philosophically, because this is where the entire structure begins to reveal itself as something less solid than it appears. What makes a desire forbidden? We might say that certain desires, if acted upon, would cause harm to ourselves or others. This is a legitimate concern, and consciousness rightly evaluates the consequences of our actions. But notice the difference between saying a desire should not be acted upon and saying a desire should not exist. The first is about behavior and its effects in the world. The second is about thought control, about policing the very arising of wants within consciousness. When you declare a desire forbidden, you are usually not just committing to not acting on it. You are committing to eradicating it from your internal landscape entirely. You are saying that to be truly conscious, you must not even want this thing. And this is where the struggle becomes endless, because desires are not under conscious control in the way that actions are. Think about how desires arise. You do not sit down and decide what to want. Wants appear, sometimes seemingly from nowhere, sometimes clearly connected to your history, your wounds, your unmet needs. They are part of the spontaneous arising of consciousness itself. By declaring certain desires forbidden, by fighting their existence, you are essentially trying to control the spontaneous. You are attempting to curate your internal experience so that only acceptable wants appear. And this is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. You must monitor your thoughts, catch forbidden desires the moment they begin to form, redirect your attention before the wanting fully emerges. You become a border guard at the edge of your own consciousness, trying to prevent certain thoughts from entering. The conscious person who does this believes they are exercising wisdom and self-control, but they are actually engaged in a form of internal violence, a rejection of what is actually present in favor of what should be present according to their idea of who a conscious person is. Here is the paradox. The very act of fighting a desire gives it more power. This is not mystical thinking, but simple psychological observation. When you resist something, you must keep it in awareness in order to maintain the resistance. You must continually remind yourself of what you are not supposed to want, which means you must keep thinking about the thing you are trying not to think about. The forbidden desire becomes the central organizing principle of your inner life, the thing around which everything else revolves. You might spend more time and energy fighting the desire than someone who simply acknowledges they have it and chooses not to act on it spends in total. The fight becomes all-consuming, and the silence around it means you cannot even see this clearly, because there is no one to point out what is happening. Moreover, there is often something precious hidden within the forbidden desire, some information about yourself that you need to understand. Desires are not random. They arise from somewhere. A forbidden desire might be pointing toward an unmet need, a disowned part of yourself, a truth you have been avoiding, a way in which your current life is not actually aligned with your deepest nature. By immediately labeling it forbidden and fighting it, you never get to explore what it might be telling you. You never get to ask the desire itself, what are you really about? What need are you trying to meet, however clumsily? What part of me are you representing? Instead, you treat it as an enemy to be destroyed, which means you never receive the information it carries. The conscious person who fights forbidden desires is often less conscious of themselves than they realize. They have become conscious of their thoughts and patterns, yes, but they have not become conscious of the judge who is deciding which thoughts and patterns are acceptable. They have not questioned the authority that forbids. Let us consider a specific example to make this more concrete. Imagine a person who has dedicated themselves to spiritual practice, to living simply, to being content with what is. They have done the work of examining their attachments, their endless wanting of more, their consumption patterns. They consider themselves conscious of how desire traps us in suffering, and yet they find themselves persistently fantasizing about wealth, about luxury, about having more than they need. This desire for material abundance feels forbidden because it contradicts everything they believe about spiritual life. So they fight it. Every time the wanting arises, they remind themselves that attachment to material things is the root of suffering, that wanting more is ego, that conscious people are supposed to be content with less. They might even feel guilty or ashamed each time the desire surfaces, evidence that they are not as evolved as they thought. But what if that desire for abundance is actually pointing towards something else entirely? What if it is arising because their commitment to simplicity has become another form of control, another way of denying themselves? What if beneath the wanting of material things is actually a desire for ease, for feeling provided for relaxing their constant vigilance around resources? What if it is their inner child who never felt secure asking to feel safe? By immediately labeling the desire as forbidden and fighting it, they never get to explore these deeper layers. They never get to have a conversation with the desire. They simply try to eliminate it, which does not work, which leads to more fighting, more silence, more exhaustion. This is what I mean when I say the structure of the struggle contains a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding is believing that consciousness means controlling what arises rather than being aware of what arises. True consciousness is not about curating your internal experience until only acceptable thoughts and desires appear. It is about being awake to whatever is actually present, including desires you wish were not there. It is about ending the war between different parts of yourself, not by victory but by understanding. When you can be conscious of a desire without immediately judging it, without instantly moving to suppress it, something remarkable happens. The desire can be examined. It can be questioned. It can be understood in context. And often, when truly seen and understood, it transforms on its own. Not through fighting, but through illumination. The silence you have been maintaining is costing you more than you realize. It is not just that you are isolated in your struggle, though that is painful enough. The silence is actually preventing the resolution you seek, because forbidden desires that cannot be spoken cannot be truly examined. They remain in the shadows, gaining power through their hiddenness, becoming more monstrous in imagination than they could ever be in reality. When something can finally be spoken, when you can say to someone you trust, "I have this desire that I have been fighting. I have this wanting that seems wrong or unhealthy or misaligned, but it persists," that speaking begins to break the spell. Not because the other person will magically solve it or even necessarily approve, but because bringing it into language, into relationship, into the light of shared understanding, strips away some of its power over you. It becomes not a shameful secret, but a human experience, something that can be looked at together, something that can be understood. Now, you might be thinking, but surely some desires really should not be indulged. Surely consciousness requires us to not act on every impulse. And you are absolutely right. This is not an argument for acting on every desire that arises. What I am questioning is the war against the arising itself. There is a profound difference between saying, "I notice I have this desire, and I am choosing not to act on it," versus "I should not have this desire, and I must fight against its existence within me." The first acknowledges reality while making a wise choice about action. The second denies reality while creating internal warfare. The first is consciousness. The second is consciousness turning against itself. Think about what happens when you truly accept that a forbidden desire exists within you. Not approve of it, not act on it, but simply accept that it is present. I notice I want this. I notice this wanting arises in me. I notice it is here. This simple acknowledgement, without the immediate layering on of judgment and resistance, creates space. In that space, you can investigate. Why might this desire be here? What is it really pointing toward? What need might it be trying to meet, however ineffectively? What part of my history or my conditioning or my present circumstances might be generating this wanting? These questions cannot be asked in the middle of a war. They require a temporary ceasefire, a willingness to be curious rather than combative. And often, through this investigation, the desire itself begins to shift. Not because you are fighting it, but because you are understanding it. Sometimes the investigation reveals that the desire is not actually forbidden at all, that you have been fighting something perfectly natural, that you labeled as wrong based on an overly rigid idea of who you should be. Sometimes it reveals that the desire is pointing toward a legitimate need that is being met in an unhealthy way. And then the question becomes, how else might this need be met? Sometimes it reveals that the desire is old, a remnant of past wounds, and that bringing awareness to its origins begins to loosen its grip. But none of this can happen while you are in full combat mode, while consciousness is being used as a weapon against parts of yourself that you wish did not exist. The conscious person who is truly awake is not someone who has eliminated all forbidden desires. They are someone who has stopped believing in the concept of forbidden desires altogether. They recognize that all kinds of thoughts and wants will arise within consciousness. Some will be wise to act on, some will not. Some point toward genuine needs, some toward old conditioning. Some are invitations to explore new territories of being. Some are signals that something in their life is out of balance. But none of them are forbidden in the sense of needing to be banished from consciousness itself. They are all information. They are all part of the total picture of who you are in this moment. And consciousness, rather than being a judge who determines what is allowed to exist, becomes a compassionate observer who sees it all without needing to wage war against any of it. This might sound permissive, like I am suggesting you just give in to every desire, but that is not what I am saying at all. I am suggesting something much more nuanced and actually much more demanding. I am suggesting that instead of the relatively simple task of fighting against forbidden desires, instead of the binary of resistance or surrender, you engage in the harder work of true understanding. You learn to be with your desires without immediately acting on them and without fighting their existence. You learn to hold them in awareness, to question them, to understand them, to trace their roots and their implications. You learn to distinguish between a desire and a decision to act on a desire. And you learn that consciousness is not about control, but about clarity. Here is what changes when you stop fighting. The desires do not necessarily go away. Some might not. But your relationship to them transforms entirely. They are no longer secret enemies you must hide from yourself and others. They become aspects of your experience that you can be curious about. The energy you were spending on constant warfare becomes available for actual living, for actual growth, for actual consciousness. And the isolation breaks. You can begin to speak about your actual internal experience, not the curated version you present to maintain your image as a conscious person, but the messy, complicated, fully human truth of what it is like to be you. This is where real transformation becomes possible, not in the perfected image, but in the honest acknowledgement of what is. If what I am sharing here resonates with something you have been feeling, something you have been carrying alone, then I want you to know you are not alone in this. There are many of us who have fought these silent battles, who have discovered that consciousness does not mean the elimination of forbidden desires, but a radically different relationship to all of our desires. I create these videos for people who are ready to question their assumptions about what consciousness means, who are willing to look at their spiritual warfare and ask whether there might be another way. If that is you, I invite you to subscribe. Not because you need another channel to follow, but because this journey of understanding yourself in deeper and more honest ways, it helps to have companions along the path. People who will not offer you easy answers or quick fixes, but who will sit with you in the complicated truth of being human. I put out a new exploration like this every week, each one diving into a different aspect of consciousness, suffering, desire, and what it really means to be awake. And I would be truly honored to have you as part of this community. So if this feels right to you, hit that subscribe button. And if this particular exploration landed for you, let me know in the comments what resonated most deeply. Your reflections often illuminate dimensions I had not considered, and this becomes a shared investigation rather than just me talking at you. So where does this leave us? You have been fighting in silence against forbidden desires, believing that this fight is what consciousness requires. But consciousness, in its truest sense, is not about warfare. It is about seeing clearly. It is about being awake to what is actually present, not what you wish were present. The person who appears to have no forbidden desires might simply be less honest about what arises in their consciousness. They might be better at hiding it, even from themselves. Or they might have learned what you are beginning to learn now, that the concept of forbidden desires is itself part of the problem, a way that consciousness turns against itself and creates unnecessary suffering. When Hannah Arendt examined the human condition, she was interested in how we actually live, not how we think we should live. She looked at the reality of human existence with clear eyes, without romantic illusions, but also without cynicism. If we bring that same clarity to this question of forbidden desires, what do we see? We see conscious beings who have learned to observe their minds, which is valuable. But we also see them using that observational capacity to wage war against themselves, to create elaborate systems of what is allowed and what is forbidden in the private realm of their own consciousness. We see them suffering in silence, isolated by shame, exhausted by constant vigilance, all in service of an image of who they think a conscious person should be. And we see that this image itself is the problem, that it is creating the very suffering they are trying to escape through consciousness. What if consciousness is not about becoming someone different, someone who only has acceptable desires? What if it is about being radically honest about who you already are, including the parts that do not fit your idea of an awakened person? What if the forbidden desires are not evidence of your failure to be conscious, but invitations to a deeper consciousness, one that can hold all of your human experience without fragmentation? This is not an easy path. It is actually harder than fighting, because it requires you to give up the battle itself, to lay down arms when you have become so identified with being a warrior. It requires you to be vulnerable enough to stop performing consciousness and instead actually be conscious of what is truly present. The fight you have been waging in silence is not noble. It is not evidence of your spiritual commitment. It is a form of self-rejection dressed up as spiritual practice. And the consciousness you are seeking, the liberation you hope for, it will not come through winning this war. It will come through ending it, through recognizing that there never needed to be a war in the first place. Your desires, all of them, even the ones you have labeled forbidden, are part of your humanity. They are arising in the field of your consciousness for reasons. Some of those reasons might be wise to act on, some might not. But the desires themselves are not your enemy. They are information. They are signals. They are the raw material of self-understanding if you can stop fighting them long enough to actually look at them. So what now? You cannot unhear what you have heard. You cannot go back to the simplicity of just fighting and believing. That is what consciousness requires. You know now that there is another possibility, a different relationship to your forbidden desires. The path forward is not comfortable. It requires you to be with discomfort rather than trying to eliminate it. It requires you to sit with desires without acting on them and without fighting them, to hold them in awareness until they reveal what they are really about. It requires you to speak what you have kept silent, at least to yourself if not yet to others, to name honestly what lives within you. It requires you to stop performing the role of conscious person and actually be conscious, which means being awake to reality rather than to your ideas about reality. And perhaps most difficult of all, it requires you to accept that you are not in control of what arises in your consciousness. You can choose your actions. You can choose your responses. You can choose what you cultivate and what you do not feed. But you cannot control the spontaneous arising of thoughts, feelings, wants. They come from depths you do not fully understand, generated by the totality of your history, your biology, your circumstances, your wounds, your unmet needs, your unexamined patterns. Consciousness does not mean controlling this arising. It means seeing it clearly, understanding it deeply, and choosing wisely how to respond. The conscious person who fights forbidden desires has not yet learned this. They are still trying to be in control of consciousness itself, rather than conscious of what actually is. The silence you have been keeping has kept you small, has kept you isolated, has kept you fighting. What if you began to speak, even just to yourself at first, the truth of your experience? What if you wrote in a journal what you dare not say aloud? What if you found one person you could trust enough to say, "I have been fighting something in myself, and I am tired and I do not know how to stop fighting"? The words themselves would begin to shift something. The acknowledgement would begin to break the spell, and gradually you might find that what you thought was a shameful secret that proved your lack of consciousness, is actually just a human experience, one that many others share, one that does not need to be forbidden at all, but only understood. This is the work, not the work of elimination, but the work of integration, not the work of curating consciousness until only pure thoughts remain, but the work of being honest about what consciousness actually contains. Not the work of fighting, but the work of understanding. And in this work, the forbidden desires begin to lose their power, not because you have successfully suppressed them, but because you have stopped giving them the power that comes from being hidden, fought against, made monstrous through silence. They become ordinary. They become understandable. They become workable. And you become more whole, less fragmented, more genuinely conscious, because you are conscious of the totality of yourself rather than only the parts you deem acceptable. So the next time a forbidden desire arises, notice what you do. Notice the immediate impulse to fight, to suppress, to feel ashamed, and in that noticing create a small space. Not a space to act on the desire necessarily, but a space to be curious about it. What is this? Where does it come from? What might it be pointing toward? What would it be like to acknowledge that this desire exists without making it forbidden? You might be surprised at what you discover. You might find that the desire itself is not nearly as powerful or as dangerous as your fight against it has made it seem. You might find that beneath the desire is something else, some deeper need or wound or truth that can finally be seen when you stop attacking the messenger. You might find that you are more human, more ordinary, more okay than you thought. And in that ordinariness, in that acceptance of your full humanity, including your forbidden desires, you might find more genuine consciousness than in all your years of warfare. Because consciousness is not about being perfect. It is about being awake to what is. And that includes all of it. Every desire, every thought, every want. Even the ones you have kept silent about. Even the ones you have fought in the dark corners of your mind while maintaining the image of awakeness for the world. You are not broken because you have forbidden desires. You are human. And the fight, that exhausting, silent fight you have been waging, it can end. Not through victory, but through understanding. Not through the elimination of the desires, but through a fundamental shift in how you relate to them. This is what I mean by consciousness. Not the consciousness that fights, but the consciousness that sees. And what it sees, when it looks clearly and honestly, is that you are already whole, already okay, already exactly where you need to be to take the next step, not toward perfection, but toward truth.